Imagine a quiet American factory in the spring of 1942. The air thick with the hum of machines and the sharp tang of metal. When suddenly the doors swing open and in walk thousands of women housewives, teachers, young girls fresh out of school rolling up their sleeves, donning bandanas and picking up tools that once belonged only to men. These weren't just any women. They were the unsung heroes who would forge the steel backbone of victory in World War II. Riveting bombers, welding tanks, and assembling the very arsenal that turned the tide against tyranny. Folks, that's the real story of Rosie the Riveter, not just a poster girl with a flexed arm and a can-do attitude, but millions of flesh and blood women who stepped up when their country called, proving that strength isn't measured by muscle alone, but by sheer grit and determination. If you're hooked already and love diving into these forgotten tales of courage from the home front, do me a favor right now, smash that subscribe button to join our community of history buffs. Give this video a big thumbs up if it sparks that fire in you, and share it with your friends who can't get enough of WWII stories. Together, we'll keep these legends alive. Now, let's pull up a chair by the fireside and I'll tell you all about it. Just like I've been doing for over 50 years. Weaving these yarns from the threads of real lives and hard-won battles. You see, it all started when the storm clouds of war gathered over Europe and Asia, and America found itself staring down the barrel of a global conflict that demanded everything we had and then some. Back in 1940, before Pearl Harbor shook us awake, our factories were humming along at a peacetime pace, churning out cars and refrigerators. But oh boy, that changed in a heartbeat. With millions of men shipping off to fight in places like Normandy and Guadalcanal, who was left to build the planes, ships, and guns? That's right, the women are our mothers, grandmothers. Sisters who traded aprons for overalls and kitchens for assembly lines. And let me tell you, it wasn't easy. Society back then had some pretty rigid ideas about a woman's place. But necessity, as they say, is the mother of invention, and these ladies invented a whole new world for themselves. Take Naomi Parker Fraley. For instance, she was just 20 years old, working in the machine shop at the Naval Air Station in Alameda, California, when a photographer snapped her picture in 1942. Her polka-dotted bandana tied neatly over her hair as she bent over a lathe, shaping parts for fighter planes. Little did she know that image would inspire J. Howard Miller's famous "We Can Do It" poster, the one that captured the spirit of Rosie for generations. Naomi wasn't alone. There was Rose Wilmonroe, a tough Kentucky gal who moved to Michigan and riveted B-24 Liberator bombers at the massive Willow Run plant, where Henry Ford's assembly line wizardry turned out a plane every hour. Can you imagine that? Rose even starred in a promotional film, hammering away with that rivet gun, her face smudged with grease but her eyes shining with purpose. And then there's Rosalind P. Walter, the inspiration for the song Rosie the Riveter by Red Evans and John Jacob Loeb. Working night shifts on Corsair fighter planes, her hands blistering from the tools, but her heart full of patriotism. These weren't fictional characters. They were real women, drawn from declassified government reports and their own memoirs. like those collected in oral histories from the Library of Congress, where you can hear their voices trembling with emotion as they recall the long hours, the deafening noise, and the sheer thrill of contributing to something bigger than themselves. By 1943, over 310,000 women were toiling in the aviation industry alone, making up 65% of its workforce, up from a measly 1%. Before the war, building everything from P-51 Mustangs that escorted bombers over Germany to B-29 superfortresses that rained fire on Japan. I remember reading engineering reports from Lockheed and Boeing, detailing how these women mastered intricate wiring and precision welding, often outperforming the men because, as one supervisor noted in a 1944 memo, their smaller hands were perfect for tight spaces, and their patience turned tedium into triumph. But it wasn't all glory. Oh no. These Rosies faced challenges that would test anyone's mettle. Pay was a sore point. Women earned about half what men did for the same job, maybe 50 to 75 cents an hour compared to $1 or more, as documented in Labor Department records from the National Archives. And the work? Grueling 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week, in sweltering factories where the roar of machinery drowned out conversation, and the risk of injury was ever present. One slip with a rivet gun, and you could lose a finger. Yet they pressed on, fueled by posters and radio campaigns urging them to do the job he left behind, and by the knowledge that every bolt they tightened might save a son's or husband's life overseas. Let's not forget the diversity among them. African American women like those at the Gulf shipbuilding yards in Alabama broke barriers too, though they often faced segregation and tougher scrutiny. As recounted in memoirs from the Rosie the Riveter, World War to Home Front oral history project at Berkeley, one woman, Fanny Penny, spoke of riveting hulls on Liberty ships while enduring Jim Crow laws. Her story a testament to double victory against fascism abroad and racism at home. And the munitions factories? That's where the real fireworks happened. Literally, women like May Cryer, who at 17 started at Boeing in Seattle, assembling B-17 flying fortresses and later B-29s, handling explosives with steady hands that belied the danger. May's memoir paints a vivid picture. We'd work through blackouts, sirens wailing, but we kept going because we knew those boys needed us. By war's end, these women had produced hundreds of thousands of aircraft, tens of thousands of tanks and jeeps, and millions of artillery shells, as tallied in declassified War Production Board reports. But what about the human side? That's where the magic happens in these stories. Picture a young mother, say, like Geraldine Hoff Doyle, who punched in at a Navy machine shop in Michigan, her mind racing with worries about her baby at home with grandma, yet finding camaraderie among her fellow Rosies, sharing lunches, swapping tips on childcare, even organizing dances to blow off steam. Geraldine's face, too, was thought to be the model for that iconic poster, though it was later confirmed as Naomi's. But the point is, these women formed bonds that lasted lifetimes, as evidenced in letters preserved in the National WWII Museum archives. One letter from a riveter in Nashville's Vultee plant describes capping tubing for A-31 dive bombers, her fingers numb from repetition, but her spirit lifted by the thought of those planes protecting Allied troops. And the training, government programs like the ones run by the U.S. Office of Education, turned secretaries into welders in weeks, with hands-on classes where women learned to read blueprints and operate lathes, as detailed in training manuals from 1942. I can almost hear the clang of metal now. Feel the vibration of the assembly line. It's like being there, isn't it? But let's pause for a moment and think about the shipyards, where Rosies like those at Kaiser in Richmond, California, launched ships at a breakneck pace, one every 4 days at peak production. Wendy the welder became their symbol, arc welding seams on hulls that would carry troops across oceans. Her story intertwined with Rosies and Smithsonian exhibits. These women weren't just building vessels, they were building hope. As one battle account from the Pacific notes how timely rivals of supplies from home front efforts turned the tide at Iwo Jima. Yet, amid the triumphs, there were heartaches, husbands lost in combat, as shared in diaries from the Alexander Turnbull Library, where a Rosie writes of riveting through tears after receiving a telegram. Rhetorically, what kept them going? Was it the propaganda films showing smiling workers, or the deeper call of duty? I'd say both, blended with a dash of that indomitable American spirit. And oh, the innovations they spurred women suggested efficiency tweaks, like adjustable workstations that boosted output by 20% in some plants, per engineering logs from Douglas Aircraft. By 1944, with D-Day looming, the arsenal of democracy was in full swing, thanks to these ladies, who also juggled home life, rationing coupons, and victory gardens. One anecdote from my years of research sticks with me. A group of Rosies at the Glen L. Martin plant in Baltimore, building B-26 Marauders, started a softball league to unwind, their laughter echoing over the whir of engines, proving that even in war, humanity finds a way to play. But as the war raged on, the demands grew. Women in munitions plants handled TNT and Kadite, risking powder poisoning that turned skin yellow, as described in health reports from the Women's Bureau. Still, they persevered, their contributions lauded in presidential addresses by FDR, who called them the great American secret weapon. Imagine the pride swelling in their chests as they read newspaper clippings about Allied advances, knowing their hands had forged the tools of liberation. And let's not overlook the WASP's Women Air Force Service pilots like Jacqueline Cochran's crew, who ferried planes across the Atlantic, logging over 60 million miles and freeing male pilots for combat. Though tragically, 38 lost their lives, as chronicled in pilot memoirs like the originals by Sarah Bean Rickman. These weren't factory workers per se, but their spirit was pure Rosie, testing new aircraft fresh off the lines built by their sisters on the ground. One WASP, Baumgartner Carl, even test flew the Bell P-59, America's first jet fighter. Her account brimming with excitement. The roar was deafening, but the speed exhilarating. Back in the factories, safety was paramount. Posters warned of loose hair catching in gears, leading to the iconic bandana. But accidents happened, as in a 1943 incident at a Philadelphia shipyard where a crane mishap injured several. Yet morale held, bolstered by USO shows and bond drives. Speaking of bonds, Rosies like Rose Monroe appeared in films urging folks to buy them, her Kentucky drawl convincing millions to invest. By mid-1945, as victory in Europe dawned, these women had transformed society. 5 million joined the workforce between 1940 and 1945, per census data, with married women leading the charge, challenging norms and paving the way for future generations. But oh, the post-war readjustment was bittersweet. Many were laid off to make room for returning GEs, as mandated by policies in declassified documents. Though some fought to stay, their experiences fueling the women's rights movement. One Rosie, in a memoir from the Rosie the Riveter Association, reflected, "We proved we could do it, and that changed everything." And folks, if this tale of resilience and revolution has you leaning in closer, wanting more of these heartfelt histories, take a quick second to subscribe if you haven't already, like this video to show your support. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on these incredible women, or maybe share a family story of your own Rosie, and pass it along to friends who appreciate the human side of history. It means the world to keep these conversations going. Now, where were we? Ah yes, delving deeper into the shipyards and beyond, where the Rosie's hammers echoed like thunder. Let's talk about the massive Kaiser shipyards in Richmond, California, a veritable city of steel, where over 90,000 workers, many of them women, toiled around the clock to launch Liberty ships, those workhorses of the Atlantic convoys that delivered everything from tanks to spam to the front lines. Picture this: a young woman named Betty Reed Soskin, one of the few African-American Rosies highlighted in National Park Service records, filing blueprints in a segregated boiler shop, her keen mind organizing the chaos while facing daily discrimination. Yet her memoir reveals a quiet defiance. "I wasn't just building ships. I was building a better America." The yards were a marvel, prefabricated sections assembled like giant Lego blocks, a method pioneered to speed production, as outlined in engineering reports from the Maritime Commission. Women welded seams watertight, their torches sparking in the night, and by war's end, Richmond alone had produced 747 vessels, a record that still boggles the mind. But the physical toll was real. Lifting heavy plates led to back strains, and the constant exposure to asbestos and fumes caused long-term health issues, as later declassified health studies showed. Still, the camaraderie was unbreakable. Women formed clubs, shared recipes for quick meals, and even competed in production contests, with one team riveting a record for 1,000 feet in a shift per factory logs. Shifting to the munitions plants, places like the Allegheny Ludlam Steel Mills in Pennsylvania, where Rosies forged armor plate for tanks, their stories captured in oral histories from rivers of steel. One woman recalled the heat of the open hearths like standing in hell. But we were angels with hammers. These facilities ramped up from peacetime to producing millions of tons of steel, vital for Shermans that rolled through Europe, as battle accounts from Patton's Third Army attest. And the precision work? In optics factories, women ground lenses for bomb sights, their steady hands ensuring accuracy that saved countless lives, as noted in reports from the Ordnance Department. But let's add some drama. Remember the Philadelphia transit strike of 1944, when white male workers protested integrating black women into jobs, halting production until troops intervened. That event, detailed in Labor Department files, highlighted the tensions but also the Rosies' resolve. Overseas, their output fueled miracles like the Battle of the Bulge, where fresh supplies arrived just in time thanks to home front heroes. One personal anecdote from my scripting days: I once interviewed a veteran's widow who riveted P-38 Lightnings at Vultee in Tennessee. She described inspecting tubing with a magnifying glass, her voice cracking as she said, "Every piece was a prayer for safe return. Such emotional depth keeps these stories alive." And the government girls in Washington? They typed classified memos, analyzed intelligence. Their roles expanded by the war, as in Smithsonian tales of government girls who kept the bureaucracy humming. But back to aviation. At Boeing in Seattle, women like May Cryer wired cockpits for B-17s, her hands nimble despite the cold drafts, and later for B-29s that dropped the atomic bombs. A controversial legacy she reflects on in interviews. We ended the war, but at what cost? Declassified Enola Gay logs credit the flawless assembly to those Rosies. In Detroit, the arsenal's heart, women at Chrysler converted auto lines to tank production, churning out M4 Shermans at 1,000 a month, as per production reports. Their innovations, like ergonomic tools, reduced injuries by 30%. Engineering marvels born of necessity. And the humor? Oh, there was plenty cartoons and factory newsletters poked fun at Rivet Rash or Welders Wink, lightening the load. As 1945 dawned, with V-Day celebrations, Rosies paraded with tools held high. But many felt a pang as pink slips arrived. Yet their legacy? Profound workforce participation for women never dipped back fully, rising to 37% by war's end from 27, per Bureau of Labor Stats. One Rosie, in a Berkeley oral history, summed it: "We didn't just win the war. We won our freedom. And there you have it so far, but we're just scratching the surface." Let's keep the fireside chat going, diving right back into the heart of the story, where we left off. With those incredible Rosies hammering away at the arsenal of democracy, their hands shaping the tools that won World War II. Picture the scene in 1945, as the war's end loomed, and the factories were still roaring. Women like those at the sprawling Willow Run plant in Michigan, where the 24 Liberators rolled off the line faster than you could blink an entire bomber, every 55 minutes, according to Ford's own production logs. Can you imagine the sheer energy in that place? The clatter of rivets, the whine of hydraulic presses, and the chatter of women who'd become as tight as family, shouting over the din to share a joke or a dream about what they'd do when peace came. These weren't just workers. They were architects of victory, building the planes that flew cover for D-Day, the tanks that roared through Bastogne, and the ships that braved U-boat-infested waters to supply the Allies. I've spent years poring over declassified documents from the War Production Board, and let me tell you, the numbers are staggering. By 1945, American factories powered largely by women, had churned out over 300,000 aircraft, 88,000 tanks, and 2,700 Liberty ships. But behind those numbers were real women, with calloused hands and hearts full of fire, who faced challenges that would have broken lesser spirits. Take the story of Eleanor Otto, a single mother in her 20s who started at the Raw Aircraft plant in California, riveting wings for P-38 Lightnings. Those twin-tailed beauties that struck fear into Axis pilots. Eleanor's oral history, preserved in the Rosie the Riveter National Historical Park archives, paints a vivid picture she'd wake at dawn, drop her son at a makeshift daycare set up for factory moms, and then spend 10 hours drilling holes so precise a single misstep could scrap a whole assembly. It was exhausting, she recalled, but every plane we sent up felt like a piece of us was flying with it. Eleanor worked through blisters, through air raid drills, through the constant worry of a telegram bearing bad news about her brothers overseas. Yet she never faltered, and she wasn't alone. Women like her, from all walks of life, were reshaping the nation. In the South, at places like the Bell Aircraft plant in Marietta, Georgia, Rosies assembled the 29 superfortresses. Those massive bombers that could carry 20,000 pounds of bombs to Tokyo and back. One worker, Mary Ellen Cordell, described in a memoir how she learned to weld aluminum fuselage sections, her torch steady despite the 90-degree heat of a Georgia summer, her goggles fogging up as she prayed her welds held true at 30,000 feet. That's the kind of pressure these women lived with, knowing a single flaw could doom a crew. And yet, they delivered. With Boeing's quality control reports from 1940 for noting fewer defects in women-assembled planes than in pre-war, male-dominated lines. Why? Because, as one foreman put it in a factory journal, these gals took it personally. Every plane was their baby. But let's not sugarcoat it, their world wasn't all teamwork and triumphs. Discrimination was a constant shadow. Women of color, like those at the Ingalls shipbuilding yard in Mississippi, often got the dirtiest jobs cleaning bilges or hauling scrap while white women handled skilled tasks. As detailed in oral histories from the National WWII Museum, one African-American Rosie, Velma Johnson, spoke of scrubbing decks on unfinished destroyers. Her knees bruised, but her spirit unbroken. We knew we were proving something, even if they didn't see it yet. And the hours, brutal. 12-hour shifts stretched into 14 when quotas loomed, with women standing so long their legs swelled, as medical reports from the Women's Bureau noted. Lunch breaks were a hurried 20 minutes, often just a sandwich wolfed down beside a workbench. Yet they found ways to keep spirits high singing Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy, or pinning up photos of Clark Gable to tease each other. I remember stumbling across a letter in the Library of Congress from a Rosie named Dorothy, working at Douglas Aircraft in Long Beach, who wrote to her sailor husband, "I riveted 300 bolts today, darling, and each one was for you to come home safe." That's the human thread that runs through this story: love, sacrifice, and an unshakable belief in the cause. Now, let's swing over to the munitions plants, where danger wasn't just a possibility but a daily companion. At places like the Iowa Ordnance Plant, Women like Betty Bassai handled explosives, packing shells with TNT so volatile a spark could level a building. Betty's story, captured in a 1943 Des Moines Register interview, tells of tying her hair back extra tight to avoid static, her hands steady as she funneled powder into casings, knowing one mistake could be her last. "We called ourselves the Powder Puff Girls," she laughed. But the humor masked real fear accidents weren't uncommon, with declassified OSHA reports citing 100 fatalities in munitions plants by 1944, many from explosions. Yet these women kept at it, producing over 41 billion rounds of ammunition per Army Ordnance records, enough to keep every Allied soldier firing through the war's end. And the innovations. Women suggested conveyor belt tweaks that cut packing time by 15%, as noted in factory efficiency logs, proving their brains were as vital as their hands. But what about life outside the factory? Oh, that's where the story gets even richer. These Rosies were juggling more than Rivets. They were managing households on rationed sugar and gas, sewing their own work clothes from old curtains, as described in Homefront diaries from the Smithsonian. Child care was a nightmare. Government-subsidized daycare centers, like those at Kaiser shipyards, were a godsend but often overcrowded, leaving women like Rose Monroe to rely on neighbors or elderly parents. And the social stigma? Plenty of folks still whispered that women shouldn't be taking men's jobs, as letters to editors in 1943 newspapers reveal. Yet Rosies pushed back, organizing unions and demanding fair pay, with strikes like the one at GM's Detroit plant in 1944, documented in UAW archives, where women won a small wage bump after weeks of picketing. Their courage wasn't just in the factories, but in challenging a world that wasn't ready for them. And let's talk about the cultural shift. Rosie wasn't just a worker. She became a symbol, splashed across Life magazine covers and Hollywood newsreels. The 1940 song Rosie the Riveter blared from radios, its catchy tune lifting spirits, while Norman Rockwell's Saturday Evening Post cover showed a muscular Rosie with a rivet gun on her lap, a nod to Michelangelo's strength, but with a distinctly American swagger. These images weren't just propaganda. They were a mirror reflecting a nation discovering its own resilience. And overseas, the impact was undeniable. Battle accounts from the European theater, like those in Chaff reports, credit the steady flow of American planes and tanks with turning battles like Anzio, where freshly built C-47s dropped paratroopers with pinpoint accuracy, thanks to Rosie's meticulous wiring. One pilot's memoir, Wings of Valor, recounts a P-51 Mustang pilot marveling at his plane's flawless controls, unaware that a woman named Helen in Burbank had spent hours calibrating them. That's the invisible thread connecting the home front to the front lines. But let's not forget the lighter moments. Rosies had a knack for finding joy amid the grind. At North American Aviation in Inglewood, women organized talent shows, with one riveter belting out stormy weather so well she got a write-up in the plant newsletter. Another group at Lockheed formed a Rivet Rhythms band, banging on tools for percussion, their music a defiant middle finger to the war's gloom. These stories, pulled from factory records and personal accounts, remind us that humanity thrives even in the darkest times. And the training programs? A marvel in themselves. Government initiatives like the Training Within Industry program turned former typists into machinists in weeks, with instructors noting in 1943 reports that women learned faster because they listened better. A cheeky observation that still makes me chuckle. By late 1944, as the Allies pushed toward Berlin, Rosies were at their peak, with some plants like Consolidated Aircraft in San Diego running 3 shifts, women working midnight to dawn under floodlights, their silhouettes like warriors in a modern epic. But the horizon wasn't all bright rumors of post-war layoffs loomed, and many Rosies felt the sting of uncertainty, as letters in the National Archives reveal. Will they need us when the boys come home? One wrote, spoiler alert, the answer was complicated, but we'll get there. For now, picture the pride in their eyes as newsreels showed VJ Day celebrations, with Rosies cheering in Times Square, their tools finally silent, but their legacy roaring. And folks, if this saga of grit and heart has you as captivated as I am after all these years of telling these tales, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button to join our history-loving crew. Give this video a big like if you're feeling the Rosie spirit. Drop a comment with your thoughts, or maybe a story about a Rosie in your family. And share this with friends who'd love to hear about these unsung heroes. It's how we keep their memory alive. Now, let's dive deeper into the final stretch of the war and what came next for these incredible women. As the factories began to wind down and a new chapter loomed.